All right, we'll go ahead and officially get started. As always, and as I mentioned last week when we spoke with some of you at MACD and in a few other cases over these last few weeks, it's perhaps especially important given the current events and transitions happening nationally to start our session with our team's beliefs about educator preparation and the students across Massachusetts. These beliefs have driven all of our work in recent years, and we continue to be using those beliefs to drive our work moving forward. We believe all students can thrive. We believe all students deserve access to effective educators. We believe through strong preparation, all educators can be effective on day one. We believe all educators must support each and every student in their care. We believe students are best supported when families, communities, and educators work together. We believe DESE sponsoring organizations and pre-K-12 schools and districts will need to take action to disrupt inequities. We believe DESE sponsoring organizations and pre-K-12 schools and districts will need to partner to build an education system that lives up to these beliefs.
Lindsay, may I pause you just for a moment? Do you have activation for closed captioning?
It should be enabled, yes.
Thank you very much.
Checking. Also, in light of the uncertainty about the national education landscape, we want to take the opportunity to emphasize that not only are these the beliefs that have driven the work within educator preparation, they're also very closely aligned to DESE's educational vision. Our acting commissioner, Russell Johnson, has taken the opportunity, both with our DESE staff and in more public events recently, to reiterate that our work will continue to remain grounded in this educational vision. And the introduction states, we will continue to work with district schools and educators to promote teaching and learning that is anti-racist, inclusive, multilingual, and multicultural, that values and affirms each and every student and their families, and that creates equitable opportunities and experiences for all students, particularly those who are historically underserved. So today, we are hoping to provide some information about the early literacy review processes, in particular details about each stage of the early literacy interim review process, and then have some time at the end to answer any questions about that review process. We'll start with some high-level goals of the Early Literacy and Educator Preparation Initiative, then talk about the two distinct review processes, formal review and interim review. Go through each of the interim review process stages step by step, and have some questions and answers towards the end. I'll turn it over to Claire.
Thank you, Lindsay. And before we turn over to the details around the interim review process, we did want to just ground everybody back in the why and the reason we're here today. And I want to start by doing that with giving you a sense of the scope and the impact of teacher preparation in Massachusetts through a couple of important numbers to keep in mind. So this actually refers to 2022, when we had over 1,800 teachers earning a Massachusetts license in early childhood, elementary, or moderate disabilities, which are the primary licensure areas responsible for teaching children how to read and write. And these individuals completed one of 162 baccalaureate and post-baccalaureate approved preparation programs in Massachusetts, and they went on to shape the learning experiences of over 388,000 students in the Commonwealth. And this cycle, give or take a couple numbers, gets repeated each and every year. So this is sort of grounding us in our context. Next slide, please. So Just to give you also a sense of our timeline, the explicit focus on early literacy began 5 years ago here in Massachusetts when DESE launched mass literacy and set course on its commitment to ensure that all students had access to evidence-based early literacy instruction. In 2021, we conducted a landscape analysis of literacy programs in educator preparation and embarked on a listening tour, really to learn more about how literacy was being taught across the state. In 2022, we put together an advisory group to begin developing program criteria for early literacy preparation that were grounded in the research base and that truly met the needs of our teachers and our students here in Massachusetts. We also began developing and piloting a literacy observation tool as a key resource to support teacher candidates' practice and feedback. Fast forward, by 2024, we were in a position to release the final early literacy program approval criteria, and we published an initial calendar of literacy-specific program reviews, which would be conducted on an accelerated timeline. All of this work is really what brings us here today, which is the official launch of program reviews of literacy-related licensure programs under the new program approval criteria. While all of this was going on, as you know, the governor and the legislature were keeping a pretty close eye on literacy in Massachusetts and building toward what would become a multi-year investment by the state to improve literacy, which is now called Literacy Launch. The state budget recently passed has allocated $20 million for this current year. And the stated purpose of this 5-year initiative is to, quote, increase the number of public schools and licensed early education and care providers in the Commonwealth, providing evidence-based literacy instruction to students in pre-kindergarten through grade 3. From our perspective, this ultimate goal is to increase the number of students reading and writing on grade level and beyond by 3rd grade. And also to advance equity in early literacy. So right now, our education system supports only about 40% of students to meet literacy expectations by grade 3, with wide disparities by race, disability status, and language status. Literacy Launch programs are being designed to help a greater proportion of students meet expectations by grade 3, while shrinking those pervasive disparities. Reading on grade level by grade 3 is a key milestone that we want for all students so that they can engage in grade level work from grade 3 on and beyond that is real world, relevant, and interactive throughout the rest of their education and truly go on to achieve academic success. So Literacy Launch is really helping us to continue this commitment and to build on our investment in literacy, including all of the supports that we're providing to educator preparation. So given this context and our commitment to ensuring that all students have access to effective educators prepared in evidence-based, culturally responsive teaching practices, we set the following goal over 3 years ago. That by 2024-25, all early childhood, elementary, and moderate disabilities teacher candidates in Massachusetts will be prepared through coursework and opportunities for practice and high-quality feedback in evidence-based early literacy as outlined in the Mass Literacy Guide. So this was and remains an ambitious goal because it was asking educator preparation providers to start the process of examining their practices and beginning any necessary technical and adaptive changes toward evidence-based literacy preparation almost immediately. In order to meet this goal, we have tried to prioritize the development of clear evidence-based program approval criteria for all licensure programs connected to early literacy instruction, professional learning and supports geared to ed prep faculty and staff, as well as the acceleration of program reviews to ensure that all literacy-related licensure programs are aligned to these new expectations beginning now. So this is why we're here today, and this is what we hope to really unpack with you so that everybody has a very clear understanding of where we're going over the next 4 years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jess to provide even more context.
Great, thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone. All right, our goal is to seamlessly integrate the early literacy specific review into the updated review process so that all reviews are efficient and streamlined for both DESE and sponsoring organizations, are implemented consistently and equitably across sponsoring organizations while recognizing their varied context, structures, and sizes, allow DESE to hear authentic feedback from a range of stakeholders impacted by programs, gather a comprehensive evidence base for decision-making, including multiple opportunities for the sponsoring organization to share examples and context, provide clear, actionable, and timely feedback to sponsoring organizations, and drive toward increasingly positive experiences and outcomes for all preparation candidates and the pre-K to 12 students they impact as educators. We would like to note that there are two types of early literacy review processes. Both will include a deeper dive into evidence supporting the early literacy program approval criteria for each early childhood, elementary, moderate disabilities pre-K to 2, and moderate disabilities pre-K to 8 initial teacher programs. For organizations up for formal review through school year 27-28, this will be directly embedded into your formal review. The resources on our toolkit were updated this summer and now reflect the integration of our early literacy throughout. For organizations scheduled for a formal review in the year 28-29 or later, an interim review has been scheduled in the interim. The timeline for these reviews is here, and that link will be dropped in the chat for you. Our team is working on building out a comprehensive toolkit for the interim reviews, which will be posted in early 2025. Today, we will talk through the interim review process stage by stage. And before we jump into the details of the interim reviews, we just want to elevate the key resources to review if your organization is coming up for a formal review. We are in the process of working with IT to update the formal review toolkit page to make the resources clearer and more navigable. In the meantime, we want to highlight a few resources. We have the template timeline. We have the planning guide for each stage, which will help answer what is required for this step in each process, what are helpful tips or considerations for each step, and specific details about required documents, candidate artifacts, recruitment and outreach, etc. And also the follow-up inquiry question banks. So there are lots of great resources for you. The links will be in the chat for you, and I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay.
Thanks, Jess. So at a high level, the interim reviews will follow the same 4 stages as the formal review. The stages will be condensed, fit within an abbreviated timeline, and because the review will exclusively focus on the early literacy program approval criteria, which means a narrower set of evidence and smaller groups of stakeholders to hear from. We also want this to be a smaller lift on you and your team as compared to the formal review. As a reminder, this updated process is what we call flipped to reduce the burden of completing the offsite submission. In the launch stage, each organization will submit required documents and candidate artifacts, along with a brief overview of its programs. DESE will then collect evidence through course observations, surveys, focus groups, and interviews in the initial inquiry. We'll only engage in these processes with stakeholders directly involved in early childhood, elementary, and moderate disabilities pre-K to 2 and pre-K to 8 programs, including faculty, program supervisors, supervising practitioners, candidates, and completers from those programs over the 3 years leading up to your review. For some of your organizations, the number of impacted stakeholders is quite small. We'll talk with each of your organizations individually during the launch stage about what that means in terms of participation and potential program groupings. Based on the evidence collected in the launch and the initial inquiry, DESE will create individualized follow-up inquiry materials, allowing your organization to address gaps or inconsistencies or elevate practices that may warrant a commendation. And then the totality of that evidence will be considered in making determinations. So now we'll take a look at the same information in a bit more detail. The launch stage for our first cohort of interim reviews began earlier this month. we sent official notification to those organizations of the review, including specific timelines with the organization specific dates and a request for an early literacy review designee to be identified, who will be our primary contact throughout the interim review process. Those folks are in the process of completing a doodle poll, and their next step in the interim review process will be a launch session in March. For interim reviews, the launch session will be virtual and will provide both an overview of the process overall and specific details about the deliverables for the launch stage and survey recruitment and participation. After the launch session, we'll follow up individually with each sponsoring organization with at least one opportunity to connect and answer any questions before the launch stage deliverables are due in June. And those deliverables are versions of the program overview, candidate artifacts, required documents, and early literacy coursework crosswalk. The early literacy coursework crosswalk, which is also called the early literacy matrix in the early literacy program approval guidelines, is one key deliverable in this stage. It will likely look very familiar as its structure mirrors the PST matrix and the old SMK matrices. Each early literacy criterion is in its own row along with the expected level of practice. And your organization will complete the matrix with information about where that criterion is covered within your program of study. Once completed, that crosswalk will be used to inform participation in faculty focus groups, survey participation, and our course observations. In the initial inquiry, which will start towards the end of the summer in each review year, DESE will collect and review evidence of impact for the early literacy programs. I should have said this will begin in the spring. After the launch session, we'll open up those stakeholder surveys to be distributed. And then the initial inquiry TA call will happen at the end of the summer to discuss the logistics of focus groups, interviews, and course observations. At least 6 weeks before the focus group and interview days, your organization will submit a completed focus group schedule. And as with the formal review, your organization is responsible for recruiting stakeholders to participate in those focus groups. We'll work with you to determine the expected participation numbers and potential program groupings for those focus groups. The focus groups and interviews will be conducted over 1 to 2 days in the fall. And the focus groups and interviews will ask stakeholders about only the early literacy program approval criteria, not the full set of program approval criteria. So those will be shorter in length than those in the formal review. DESE will also work with your organization and use the information from the early literacy coursework crosswalk to identify courses to be observed. Ideally, those observations will take place during the initial inquiry period, but of course it will be determined based on availability and when those courses are offered. For most programs, we anticipate observing about 3 course sessions, though that is dependent on the number of programs, the length and duration of those course sessions, and the number of sections offered for each course. Those course observations will be either in person or virtual, depending on the course delivery method. We'll use that completed literacy coursework crosswalk to schedule dates and times in collaboration with your team that align with the course offerings and do not coincide with the focus group and interview days. We'll also reach out to the instructors for those course observations to introduce ourselves, confirm logistics, and give them space to share additional context about the course session we'll observe. As with our formal review process, at the end of the initial inquiry, all of the evidence collected throughout the launch and initial inquiry stages will be evaluated. For those criteria where the evidence is not consistently positive, your organization will have the opportunity to review the key evidence collected and respond with additional evidence to support the criterion. For criteria where the evidence we've collected is consistently positive, your organization has the option to submit additional evidence if you believe a commendation may be warranted, but it will not be required. Those criteria will be considered met. So at this point in the review process, we'll review the program overview, candidate artifacts, required documents, surveys, focus groups and interviews, and any available state collected data to make those determinations. I want to stress that we will not issue a finding without providing your organization the opportunity to provide additional evidence during the follow-up inquiry. About 1 month after the focus groups, we'll hold a technical assistance call with each organization to review those individualized follow-up inquiry materials, including the additional evidence that we'll request for each program based on what we collected in the initial inquiry. Much of the evidence will be requested through the targeted submission worksheets, and additional evidence may be requested through candidate artifacts, additional observations, or other sources when appropriate. Your organization will have about 12 weeks to complete and submit the follow-up inquiry materials. Again, this timeline is shorter than the formal review timeline because the follow-up inquiry, again, will focus only on the early literacy program approval criteria and only on the relevant programs. For those organizations that participated in the formative feedback reviews run by TPI in recent years, the evidence in those reports, including any work that your organization has done to address recommendations from TPI, will likely be a very valuable source of evidence for the follow-up inquiry, and we hope will further reduce the lift of this stage in the process. As in the formal review, DESE will then draft a report that summarizes the evidence collected throughout the review and includes ratings for each criterion. Those ratings will be reviewed by an internal DESE team to ensure they're grounded in evidence, aligned with the criteria, and consistent with decisions made across other reviews. We'll share a draft report with your organization that includes the criterion and domain level ratings for each program. Your organization should review the report and share back any factual inaccuracies within 10 days. As in the formal review, this is a short turnaround time because we are only asking for responses to factual inaccuracies, not for additional evidence or for folks to be contesting judgments at this time. Once our team has made any necessary changes based on your factual accuracy response, the results will be shared with the commissioner who has the authority to make approval determinations. These determinations and a final report will be issued by June 30th of the review year. Based on the evidence collected throughout the review, the final report will include an approval determination for each elementary, early childhood, moderate disabilities pre-K2, moderate disabilities pre-K8 initial licensure program at your organization. The literacy-specific reviews will result in 1 of 5 approval designations: approved with distinction, approved, approved with conditions, probationary approval, and not approved. Given the narrowed focus of the interim reviews on only the early literacy program approval criteria, programs reviewed through the interim review process will not be granted not approved. They will not have their approval revoked at the conclusion of an interim review. Programs may be granted conditional or probationary approval, and those programs will need to submit improvement plans indicating how they will address each condition. Evidence of impact for any of those conditions will be reviewed annually, and each organization is up for formal review approximately 3 years after the interim review, at which point DESE will collect evidence of impact on both the program approval criteria and the early literacy program approval criteria. After today, the next steps will be that by the end of this month, these slides, the recording from our conversation and a write-up of the Q&A will be posted on our website. In early 2025, the full early literacy interim review toolkit will be posted on our website. And for organizations in the first cohort of reviews, they can expect a formal invitation with a specific date for the March launch session within the next several weeks. I'm going to stop the recording.